Hello and welcome back to Nifty 50 Photographers, and in today's video I'm going to be talking about how to use focus bracketing with the Sony A7R V. Right, let's have a look at the setup first. So you need to go into drive mode. The easiest way to get into that, press the 9 o'clock position on the back of the camera on the command wheel. You then get up to the focus bracketing option. Now if you press the command wheel to the right, that's the 3 o'clock position, you'll then be able to change some of the parameters. Now what do they mean? So the first thing you come across is a menu that will say 4 as standard, for example. Now if you scroll up and down that, at the bottom you get very narrow and at the top you get wide. Now what that's doing is setting, if you like, the distances between the shots in your scene. So if you set it to narrow, you will take a lot more shots that you'll end up focus stacking at the end of the process. If you set it to wide, conversely, you'll take a lot less. So usually I set it to wide because I find it does a pretty good job with that wide setting. So it's going to take a number of shots, it's going to decide how many it takes itself to get a completely focus stacked image. So the next thing you get as you scroll across is the number of shots. Now I usually set this to quite a high number because the camera isn't actually going to take that number of shots, it's going to take as many as it needs. So as long as you've set it high enough to allow it to take that many shots, you'll be fine. So I just set that to 50 and I've found that's more than enough. Typically it's taking sort of between 10 and 20. Scroll across one more, you get into the next menu. On the top of that menu you see something saying focus bracket order, and it gives you two choices here. Top choice is it's going to focus on the point you've selected that is the nearest to the camera, so the point that is closest to focus on, and then it's going to keep taking more shots, focusing further and further back until it gets to infinity. The second choice just gives you 3 shots. Going to start with focusing on the point that you've selected. Now choose something that's about in the middle of your scene, because the next shot it's going to do is a closest focus that it can do, and the final shot it's going to do is around infinity, so something that's way in the distance, and it's going to take 3 shots. Now it's going to completely override that number of shots you had the chance to choose in the previous menu. The next item on that menu is a thing called exposure smoothing, and it's pretty much self-explanatory. So what you're asking the camera to do, if you set that to on, it will adjust the exposure with each shot it takes. If you leave it off, it'll just set the exposure as it is on the first shot and keep those exposure settings for the rest of the sequence. I generally choose that option because I'm not expecting the lighting conditions to change in the few seconds that the camera is going to take those shots. But if you set a long interval between shots, and we'll come to that in just a second, then you might want to set that to on. So the next item on the menu is shooting interval, and this gives you a chance to choose whether you want a gap between your shots or not. If you set it to shortest, the camera will just automatically rattle through the shots as fast as it can according to the shutter speed you need. The rest are obvious. You can set a delay between each of the shots. Not quite sure why you'd want to do that. I haven't found a function for it yet, but if you do, why don't you let me know in the comments why you would use that. And then the final option on that menu is where you want it to store those files. Now I actually find it useful to store them in a separate folder, because sometimes when I'm looking back through my images it's hard to tell which ones I've done a focus stack, particularly if I'm doing something like maybe an exposure bracketing set as well. So if you want to be able to easily find all the ones you've focus bracketed, set that to a new folder. Each time you take a focus bracketed set, it'll go into its own folder, so that makes it easy when you're reading them back onto your computer to find all your focus bracketed images, and that way you can focus stack them easily in Photoshop. Well, let's have a look at a set of focus bracketed images that I've taken. Now one of the bonuses you'll find, here's the first shot. Right at the bottom of the frame there you can see my tripod leg. What I was trying to do was make the stone that's in the foreground there a bit of foreground interest, so that was really the first image I wanted to focus on. Actually I had an ND filter on, it was a bit difficult to see my screen. I actually asked the camera to focus on something that was too close for it to focus on. But it actually doesn't matter. Great thing about this camera is it tries to focus on that, then it moves on to the next image. Because it hasn't got the first one in focus, you can discard that when you get back and have a look at them on a bigger screen. Camera just carries on, takes all the images it needs to get a fully focused scene, irrespective of the fact that the first one was out of focus. So don't worry about it too much which point you choose. Just choose something that's close to you and allow it to work back from 0 to infinity. Now for this case, I got a set of 9 images. So what do you do with them when you've got that set? What you do is, I'm starting in Lightroom. You select all your images, you go to Photo and then the Edit In menu, and you go Open as Layers in Photoshop. It might take a few minutes depending on how many images you've got. Once you've got all those layers open, you need to select them all. So click on the first, press the Shift key and click on the bottom image, then go to the Edit menu and choose Auto Align Layers. And in the next menu you can just choose Auto. You're wanting it to produce a stack of images. Now it'll take a little bit of time to crunch that through. Once it's done that, now you need to do the blending bit. So you go to the same menu and choose Auto Blend Layers and choose the option that says Stack Images. And again, let it do the number crunching, and the final thing it will produce is a stacked image that should have everything perfectly in focus. So that's how you can produce a set of images that you can focus stack and get a really sharp image right from your foreground completely to the background. Now when would you use that? Typically if you're using a wide angle lens, doing a landscape photo, you've got something right close to you in the foreground, only about 30 centimeters away, or the nearest that your camera would focus on might be 30 to 50 centimeters. So that's when I would use that technique. You might also use it in macro photography when you want the whole scene to be perfectly sharp rather than the subject to be sharp and the surrounding areas to be out of focus. Now if you want to know more about focus stacking, I have a separate video which you can watch here that tells you all about how to do focus stacking in a manual way. Perhaps you don't have the luxury of having a camera that'll take care of it for you. And I hope you'll enjoy that. Go out and have some fun with your camera, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.